to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Pastor Steve Andrews.
For our time together in God's Word today, we turn to 1 Chronicles chapter 12. Now these are the men who came to David at Ziklag, while he could not move about freely because of Saul the son of Kish. And they were among the mighty men who helped him in war. They were bowmen and could shoot arrows and sling stones with either the right or the left hand. And they were Benjaminites, Saul's kinsmen. The chief was Ahiezer, then Joash, both sons of Shema of Gibeah, also Jezael and Pelet, the sons of Asmaveth, Berekah, Jehu of Anathoth, Ishmael of Gibeon, a mighty man among the 30 and a leader over the 30, Jeremiah, Jahaziel, Johanan, Jozabad of Gedera, Eluzai, Jeremoth, Beliah, Shemariah, Shephatiah, the Haruphite, Elkanah, Ishiah, Azarel, Jozer, and Jashobim the Korites, and Jola and Zebediah the sons of Jeroham of Gedor. From the Gadites there went over to David at the stronghold in the wilderness mighty and experienced warriors, expert with shield and spear, whose faces were like the faces of lions, and who were swift as gazelles upon the mountains. Ezer the chief, Obadiah second, Eliab third, Mishmanah fourth, Jeremiah fifth, Attai sixth, Eliel seventh, Johanan eighth, Elzabad ninth, Jeremiah 10th, Machbenai 11th. These Gadites were officers of the army. The least was a match for 100 men, and the greatest for 1,000. These are the men who crossed the Jordan in the first month when it was overflowing all its banks, and put to flight all those in the valleys to the east and to the west. And some of the men of Benjamin and Judah came to the stronghold to David. And David went out to meet them and said to them, "If you have come to me in friendship to help me, my heart will be joined to you. But if to betray me to my adversaries, although there is no wrong in my hands, then may the God of our fathers see and rebuke you." And then the Spirit clothed Amasai, chief of the 30, and he said, "We are yours, O David, and with you, O son of Jesse. Peace, peace to you, and peace to your helpers, for your God helps you." And then David received them and made them officers of his troops. Some of the men of Manasseh deserted to David when he came with the Philistines for the battle against Saul, yet he did not help them, for the rulers of the Philistines took counsel and sent him away, saying, "At peril to our heads he will desert to his master Saul." As he went to Ziklag, these men of Manasseh deserted to him: Adnah, Jozabad, Jediael, Michael, Jozabad, Elihu, and Zillethai, chiefs of thousands in Manasseh. They helped David against the band of raiders, for they were all mighty men of valor, and were commanders in the army. For from day to day men came to David to help him, until there was a great army like an army of God. And these are the numbers of the divisions of the armed troops who came to David in Hebron, to turn the kingdom of Saul over to him according to the word of Yahweh. And the men of Judah bearing shield and spear were 6,800 armed troops. Of the Simeonites, mighty men of valor, for war 7,100. Of the Levites, 4,600. The prince Jehoiada of the house of Aaron, and with him 3,700. Zadok, a young man mighty in valor, and 22 commanders from his own father's house. Of the Benjaminites, the kinsmen of Saul, 3,000. Of whom the majority had to that point kept their allegiance to the house of Saul. Of the Ephraimites, 20,800 mighty men of valor, famous men in their fathers' houses. Of the half-tribe of Manasseh, 18,000 who were expressly named to come and make David king. Of Issachar, men who had understanding of the times to know what Israel ought to do, 200 chiefs and all their kinsmen under their command. Of Zebulun, 50,000 seasoned troops, equipped for battle with all the weapons of war, to help David with singleness of purpose. Of Naphtali, 1,000 commanders, with whom were 37,000 men armed with shield and spear. Of the Danites, 28,600 men equipped for battle. Of Asher, 40,000 seasoned troops ready for battle. Of the Reubenites and Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh from beyond the river, 120,000 men armed, with all the weapons of war. All these men of war, arrayed in battle order, came to Hebron with a whole heart to make David king over Israel. Likewise all the rest of Israel were of a single mind to make David king, and they were with David for 3 days, eating and drinking, for their brothers had made preparation for them. And also their relatives from as far as Issachar and Zebulun and Naphtali came bringing food on donkeys and on camels and on mules and on oxen, abundant provisions of flour, cakes of figs, clusters of raisins and wine and oil, oxen and sheep, for there was joy in Israel. This is the word of the Lord. So in yesterday's chapter, we had a list of the mighty men of King David, and that's more of an overview of David's mighty men, the mightiest of the mighty. Today is kind of doubles back, really, and goes to the time where King Saul has not yet died, and recounts for us the men who have left Saul's service to join David. And just immediately, right off the top with that context, might be worth talking about with your children, is this right or wrong? Typically speaking, I think as the church, the Christian perspective would be such a thing to desert the God-given authority over you would be wrong to do, but rather serve them as long as you can and as best as you can in ways that are faithful to God and to their order. However, in this case, it's a little different because not only is Saul the Lord's anointed, God has actually rejected Saul, and the Lord has anointed David. So when they end up leaving Saul's service and joining David's service, it's a good thing. It's actually the right thing because he is the Lord's chosen one. And if everyone had abandoned Saul, showing that faith in what the Lord had done and gone over to David's side, well, their history would have played out a little differently at that point. I mean, it would have ended up in the same direction, but they don't have such strong faith as a nation. But these men did. These men, they go to David despite the risk. Basically, the king's going to view this as treason. But they're willing. So these are the men who came to David at Ziklag while he could not move freely because of Saul, the son of Kish. So this is 1 Samuel chapter 27, during that time where Saul is chasing David, trying to kill David. At one point, David flees to Philistia, to the Philistines, to the city of Gath, to King Achish, Achish. And basically, he reasons with Achish. Once he gets there, Saul leaves him alone. Saul's not willing to pursue. Essentially, David tells Achish that he's not worthy to live in his royal city, and asks for a place that he can live. And so Achish grants him Ziklag, which is a town, basically a border town for what Philistia had in its control. It is essentially just a couple miles north of the city of Beersheba, which is the southernmost city in the kingdom of Israel. So this is pretty close to Israelite territory to begin with, and it becomes Israel's territory. In fact, you'll read in 1 Samuel 27 that Ziklag will remain with Judah after this as well. So David takes it as a city. So anyway, he sets up shop there. He's there for a year and 4 months, and these are the men who join him in that time, who help him in war. Then we learn a few things about them. So there's going to be bowmen who could shoot the bows and sling stones. That should remind you of King David himself fighting against Goliath with either the right or left hand. Ambidextrous is a useful thing in war and in battle. These men, well, I mean, we actually see in Judges, I believe it was chapter 21, might have been 20, where the Benjaminites are fighting against the rest of Israel, and they have 700 men, left-handed, skilled with the sling that could hit a hair without missing. So that's a skill. It truly is, and these men have that, and they are also Benjaminites. It's possible there could be some overlap in that. I think those were all wiped out, though. So these men, some of the ones you'll see in the list today may well be some of the same that you saw on the list yesterday. For example, verse 6, Joshua-beam, he was one of the leading ones in the mighty men list of King David. So that was back in, really right away, verse 11 in chapter 11. Joshua-beam, a Hakmonite, was chief of the three. So could it be that that's one and the same man? Could be. There could be some overlap. But again, this list is going to give us another. It's going to be not actually as long at the first at least. It gets to 42. I asked you to count them yesterday. I got to 51. I get to 42 today, so you're welcome as a family to count them as well and see what number you get to. You're going to stop that count in verse 22 when they're described as being like an army of God, because really the text transitions in between 22 and 23 to something else. The first 22 verses are a description of the men who have abandoned Saul to side with King David while Saul is yet alive and yet considered to be Israel's king by the nation. And so you get some from Benjamin in the first paragraph. You get some from Gad, which is across the Jordan River on the east side, and that have come over. I look at their description there in verse 8. Their faces are like the faces of lions, and they're swift as gazelles. So intimidation and speed, very useful things in combat. There are 11 of those out of the 42. Note the description in verse 14 that even the least of these mighty men could take on 100, but the greatest could take on 1,000. That's high praise. I mean, for the least to be that strong, but also, again, for the strongest to take on 1,000 men by himself. They crossed the Jordan River in the first month. So when they defected, if you want to phrase it that way, when they came to serve David, they did so at the time of the year, basically spring, March, April, that kind of time period, the Jordan River filled with the rainwaters overflowing, and yet they've crossed that extra sizable river to get to David. And when they get across the river, they have to put to flight all those who are in the valleys. In other words, they were not met in peace. They were met with, I don't know that I want to say war, but maybe skirmishes, groups of Benjamin or Judah that maybe weren't yet loyal to David and wanted to prevent Gad from joining David down in Ziklag. Then we do have in verse 16, though, some of the men of Benjamin and Judah who come to David. They come to him there and they seek to join him. David greets them. This is the only time we get anything like this in the chapter today, that David actually speaks to them. If you've come in friendship, my heart will be joined to you. If you betray me, God of our fathers, see and rebuke you. So if they come for good purpose, David is with them. If they've come for evil purpose, God judge them. Strong terms. And they say peace to you. Amasai being number 35 on my count today, so you can check and see with your notes and how you're doing. Maybe you're ahead of me. We get to verse 19. So we've had Benjamin, we've had Gad, and now we've had Judah. Now we get Manasseh added to the list. And there's a note about this group from Manasseh that they deserted to David when he came with the Philistines for battle against Saul. And that is a reference to 1 Samuel chapter 29. And you get the little parenthetical note in ESV, which just in the text, plainly, really in Hebrew, he did not help them, for the rulers of the Philistines took counsel, sent him away. They basically went to the king of Philistia as they were getting ready to fight and said, you can't take David with you. You don't know if you can trust him or not. And the king trusted David, but the men didn't. So the king ultimately ends up sending David home instead. And then we get in verse 21 that these Manassites helped David against the band of raiders. They were mighty men of valor. That's 1 Samuel chapter 30, which again, talking about Ziklag, the Amalekites would raid Ziklag and destroy it, capturing the women and carrying them off. And so these helped David fight back and overcome them. And then lastly, verse 22, day to day, these men were joining David until there was a great army like an army of God. So the building of King David's army. And King David's going to be known among Israel, among Jewish history, certainly to this day, as a warrior king. One who was frequently at battle, especially with the Philistines. The rest of the text, verses 23 onward, really does shift. Now we are looking not at the mighty men joining David, but at the army itself that has joined David. And at this time, and we're not talking anymore about before Saul's death, this is where in chapter 11 they have come to make him king. They've come to bring him to Jerusalem, to Judah, to bring him as king over them. And so this is a giant procession of the people. They come to David in Hebron, where he has reigned as a king of Israel for 7 years, 6 months. And we get this list. Men from every tribe of Israel joining themselves to King David. It's hard to say exactly how big the list gets because of verses 27 and 28. And I'll cover that in just a second. If you skip those and just add the rest of the numbers up, you get to 337,100. Verse 26 said that the Levites numbered 4,600, and then it separated some of the Levites out. Prince Jehoiada, the house of Aaron, which would be a Levite, but of the priestly line, with 3,700. So my question is his 3,700 part of the 4,600? So here's how the 4,600 break down. Or is it in addition to? Because these priests are Levites. That's the question. So if it's just 4,600 and it's divided with the Prince Jehoiada and Zadok, then you have 337,100 men. However, if Prince Jehoiada and Zadok are in addition to the 4,600, the total comes up to 340,824 men who have joined, not just joined David, who have come to escort David. That's a better way to put this. This is a royal procession, which is really neat to think of and could be a fun way to talk about it together as a family. Can you imagine a procession like this? Can you imagine 340,000 soldiers marching? And at this point, I didn't measure it exactly, probably 30 miles, 40 miles from Ziklag back to Judah and Jerusalem. They're not going to have Jerusalem right away. David will have to conquer it with his men. Not much of an issue, though. They conquered Jebus, or Jerusalem, pretty easily, it would appear, and then they rebuild it, as we have already seen in the book. They have all this food, as you get in verse 40, because they're joyful. There is joy in Israel over this new king, and so there was enough preparation for all these men to eat for this large army as they bring, again, their new king, as they bring him home. A good family conversation to wrap up this text as we think about Israel having joy in their new king. Who is the king that we have joy in today? And that king is the descendant of David, the son of David, of whom David said, "The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I have made your enemies a footstool for your feet." It's Jesus. Jesus is our King. Jesus is our joy and our hope and our treasure. He is all things to us. Amen.